The distant sound of hooves thundering against the earth caught Dorothy Ziegler's attention as she lingered by the window of the isolated ranch house, her sanctuary and prison for the past 22 years. Her heart quickened at the unfamiliar noise visitors were rare at Shadow Creek Ranch, 10 miles outside of Santa Rosa, California, and her Uncle Silas made certain of that. It was the spring of 1873, and Dorothy had never ventured beyond the boundaries of her uncle's property. Not since her parents had died in that terrible fire when she was just a baby. Uncle Silas had told her the world was dangerous, full of thieves, murderers, and men who would take advantage of a young woman's innocence. He'd raised her alone, keeping her safe, or so he claimed, by keeping her hidden. "Dorothy," Uncle Silas's gruff voice called from downstairs. "Get away from that window and finish your chores." She stepped back, letting the faded curtain fall back into place. At 22, Dorothy was a woman grown, yet she lived under her uncle's strict rules as though she were still a child. Her long auburn hair was always neatly braided down her back, her dresses modest and practical. The only education she'd received came from the books her uncle occasionally brought home from town and the basic schooling he'd given her himself. "Yes, Uncle Silas," she called back, though her eyes lingered on the curtain, wondering about the approaching rider. She descended the narrow staircase to find her uncle loading his shotgun near the door, his weathered face set in a scowl beneath his gray beard. At 65, Silas Mercer was still strong, his tall frame imposing despite his years. His eyes, the same hazel as Dorothy's, narrowed as he glanced at her. "I'm going to meet our visitor," he said, the word visitor sounding like a curse on his lips. "You stay inside, understand? Don't make a sound, don't show yourself." Dorothy nodded obediently, though curiosity burned within her. "Who is it, Uncle?" "Nobody that concerns you." He adjusted his hat and stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind him. Dorothy waited until she heard his footsteps fade before rushing to the kitchen window. From there, she could see the approaching rider without being seen herself. The man sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the California sky. Even from this distance, she could tell he was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair visible beneath his hat. As the stranger approached, Uncle Silas raised his shotgun in greeting, a clear warning rather than a welcome. "State your business," she heard her uncle call out, his voice carrying on the clear spring air. The rider pulled his horse to a stop, raising one hand to show he meant no harm. "Name's Jackson Irwin," the man called back, his voice deep and steady. "New ranch foreman at the Silverton place. Mr. Silverton sent me to introduce myself to the neighbors." Dorothy's breath caught. The Silverton ranch bordered their property to the east, but she'd never met any of the people who lived there. Uncle Silas did his business in town and rarely discussed the neighbors. "Well, now you've introduced yourself," Silas replied coldly. "No need to dismount." But the rider Jackson swung down from his saddle anyway, moving with an easy grace that made Dorothy watch more intently. He was tall, taller than her uncle, with broad shoulders and a lean frame. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but she could see a strong jaw dusted with stubble. "Mr. Silverton mentioned there might be some issues with the creek that runs between our properties," Jackson said, seemingly unperturbed by Silas's hostility. "Thought we might discuss it, neighbor to neighbor." "Nothing to discuss," Silas barked. "The water rights were settled years ago." Jackson nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the property, and for a moment Dorothy was certain his gaze landed on the kitchen window where she stood. She ducked back, heart pounding. "Fair enough," she heard him say. "But Mr. Silverton also mentioned he'd be happy to lend a hand if you ever need help with anything. Can't be easy managing this place alone." I manage just fine, Silas snapped. And I'm not alone, I have my niece. Dorothy stiffened. Uncle Silas never mentioned her to strangers. Is that so? Jackson's voice held interest now. I didn't realize you had family here. Not that it's any of your business, Silas replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do, of course. I'll be on my way then. There was a pause then. Pass along my greetings to your niece. Dorothy peeked out again to see Jackson mounting his horse, his movements fluid and confident. As he turned his horse to leave, he looked back at the house once more, and this time she was certain his eyes met hers through the window. A small smile touched his lips before he tipped his hat and rode away. She stepped back from the window, her heart racing. That brief connection had felt significant somehow, as though a door had opened slightly in her sheltered world. When Uncle Silas returned to the house, his face was thunderous. I told you to stay out of sight, he growled. I was just curious, Dorothy replied, trying to keep her voice steady. We rarely have visitors, and for good reason. He hung his shotgun on the pegs by the door. That man has no business here. He seemed polite enough, she ventured. Uncle Silas fixed her with a hard stare. You know nothing about men like that, Dorothy. They smile and tip their hats, but they're wolves underneath. Your parents trusted the wrong people and it got them killed. I won't let the same happen to you. The mention of her parents made Dorothy fall silent. Uncle Silas rarely spoke of them, and when he did, it was always with the same warning: trust no one. I need to ride into town for supplies, he said after a moment. You know the rules. Stay inside, keep the doors locked. Yes, Uncle Silas. He studied her face as if searching for signs of deception, then nodded once before gathering his things. I'll be back before dark. After he'd gone, Dorothy moved through her daily chores mechanically, but her mind kept returning to the stranger, to Jackson Irwin, with his easy smile and the way he'd looked at her. Really looked at her. Not through her, as Uncle Silas often did. As the afternoon waned, she found herself drawn to the eastern property line, something she'd never dared before when Uncle Silas was away. The creek that separated their land from the Silverton Ranch bubbled merrily in the spring sunlight. She followed it, entranced by the simple freedom of walking beyond her usual boundaries. Didn't expect to see you out here. The voice made her whirl around, nearly losing her balance. Jackson Irwin stood a few yards away, his horse grazing nearby. Without his hat, his dark hair caught the sunlight, and she could see his eyes were a striking blue. I shouldn't be here, she stammered, taking a step back. He stayed where he was, seemingly aware that she might bolt like a startled deer. You have as much right to enjoy this creek as anyone, he said. It's a beautiful spot. Dorothy glanced around nervously. My uncle would be furious if he knew. Is he always so protective? Jackson asked, his tone conversational. He says the world is dangerous, she replied, surprising herself with her candor. Jackson's expression softened. Parts of it are, he agreed, but not all of it, not this. He gestured to the creek, the trees, the open sky above them. This is just nature, plain and simple. Dorothy found herself relaxing slightly. I've never been farther than our property line. His eyebrows rose in surprise. Never, not even to town, she shook her head, embarrassed by how sheltered it made her sound. Uncle Silas says it's not safe, and you've never questioned that. There was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity. He raised me after my parents died, she explained. He's only trying to protect me. Jackson nodded slowly, then stepped closer, moving with deliberate care as if approaching a wild animal. I'm Jackson Irwin, he said, extending his hand. But my friends call me Jack. After a moment's hesitation, Dorothy reached out. His hand was warm and calloused, enveloping hers completely. Dorothy Ziegler, she replied. It's a pleasure to meet you properly, Dorothy. He released her hand but maintained that gentle gaze. "How old were you when your parents died?" "Just a baby," she said. "There was a fire. Uncle Silas saved me." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "And he's kept you here ever since." "It's not so bad," she defended quickly. "I have books and the garden," and she stopped, realizing how pitiful it sounded. "And have you never wanted to see more? Santa Rosa is a growing town. There's a theater now and shops and people your age." The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Of course I've wondered," she admitted. "But Uncle Silas says cities are full of danger and corruption." Jack laughed softly. "Santa Rosa is hardly San Francisco. It's just a small town with good people trying to make their way." He studied her for a moment. "Would you like to see more of the countryside at least? I could take you riding sometime." Dorothy's heart leapt at the offer, but reality quickly dampened her excitement. Uncle Silas would never allow it. "Maybe he doesn't need to know," Jack suggested with a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Not at first, anyway." She should have been scandalized by the suggestion, but instead Dorothy felt a thrill of possibility. "I don't even know how to ride," she confessed. "I could teach you." He glanced at the sky, noting the position of the sun. "But not today. Your uncle will be back soon, I expect." Dorothy nodded, suddenly aware of how long she'd been gone from the house. "I should go." "Will you come to the creek tomorrow?" Jack asked. Around this time, she hesitated, torn between caution and the desire to see him again. "I'll try," she finally said. His smile was warm and genuine. "Until tomorrow, then, Dorothy Ziegler." As she hurried back to the ranch house, Dorothy felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. For the first time, the boundaries her uncle had established didn't seem protective, they felt like chains. That evening, as they ate their simple supper, Uncle Silas was more taciturn than usual, brooding over his plate. Finally, he spoke. "I heard in town that the Silverton place is planning to expand their cattle operation. Going to need more water." Dorothy kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened at the mention of the neighboring ranch. "Is that why their new foreman came by? To discuss water rights?" Silas's gaze sharpened. "You took quite an interest in that man." "I was just curious," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "As you said, we rarely have visitors." "Well, get your curiosity in check. Men like that are trouble, Dorothy. They see a young woman living isolated and they think she's easy pickings." "Jackson Irwin didn't seem that way to me," she replied before she could stop herself. Silas slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. "You don't know anything about men. Your mother thought she knew better too, trusted too easily, and look where that got her." Dorothy flinched, but for once she didn't immediately back down. "You've never told me exactly what happened to my parents, just that there was a fire." "Because you don't need to know the details," he growled. "All you need to know is that this world is full of people who will hurt you given half a chance. I've kept you safe for 22 years, and I won't stop now." The conviction in his voice gave her pause. Whatever had happened all those years ago, Uncle Silas truly believed he was protecting her. But as she washed the dishes later, watching the sunset paint the distant hills in gold and crimson, Dorothy couldn't help but wonder if safety was worth the price of never truly living. The next day, her heart pounded as she made her way back to the creek after Uncle Silas had departed for the barn to mend some equipment. She told herself she was just going for a walk, that she might not even see Jack again, but her steps quickened as she neared the property line. He was there, leading 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a gentle-looking Palomino mare. His face brightened when he saw her. "You came," he said, as though he'd been uncertain. "I shouldn't have," she replied, even as she approached. "Uncle Silas would be furious." Jack's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about that. I don't want to cause trouble between you and your uncle, Dorothy, but I also think there's something not right about keeping a grown woman isolated from the world." His concern touched her. "He believes he's protecting me." "From what, though?" Jack asked gently. "What happened to your parents that made him so fearful?" Dorothy shook her head. "He never tells me details. Just that there was a fire and that they trusted the wrong people." Jack frowned. "That's not much to go on." He hesitated, then gestured to the horses. "I brought Daisy for you. She's the gentlest mare on the ranch, perfect for a beginner. I thought maybe we could ride along the creek, still on your property so you're not going too far from home, just to give you a taste of freedom." The offer was tempting, impossibly so. To feel the wind in her hair, to see more of the land that had been her whole world yet remained largely unexplored. "I don't know the first thing about horses," she admitted. "Then today's lesson one," Jack said with a warm smile. "Just the basics. How to approach her, how to let her know you're a friend." For the next hour, he showed her how to gain Daisy's trust, how to saddle her properly, and the correct way to mount. His instructions were patient and clear, and his hand steady when he helped her up into the saddle for the first time. The height was dizzying at first, but the mare stood calmly, seeming to sense Dorothy's nervousness. "That's it," Jack encouraged as she tentatively took the reins. "Just relax. She can feel everything you're feeling." Gradually, Dorothy's tension eased, and with Jack leading Daisy by a long rein, they began to walk slowly along the creek. The sensation was unlike anything she'd experienced: the gentle rocking motion, the feeling of the powerful animal beneath her responding to her subtle movements. "This is amazing," she breathed, a smile spreading across her face. Jack looked up at her, his own expression reflecting her joy. "You're a natural, Dorothy. A few more lessons and you'll be riding on your own." "Do you really think so?" The idea both terrified and thrilled her. "Absolutely." He guided them around a bend in the creek to where the trees opened up, revealing a vista of rolling hills dotted with spring wildflowers. "Look at that view," Dorothy gasped softly. Though she'd lived here her entire life, she'd never seen the land from this perspective. "It's beautiful." "This is just the beginning," Jack said. "There are places not far from here that would take your breath away: meadows full of wildflowers, forests with trees taller than buildings, views of the ocean from the coastal ridges." The mention of such places made Dorothy's chest ache with longing. "Will you show me?" "Someday." His eyes met hers, serious now. "If you want me to, yes." They continued along the creek, Jack pointing out various plants and animals, sharing stories about his life before coming to work for the Silvertons. He'd grown up on a ranch in Texas, had fought briefly in the war before deciding he wanted no part of killing, and had worked his way west over the past few years. "What brought you to Santa Rosa specifically?" Dorothy asked as they turned back toward where they'd started. A shadow crossed Jack's face. "I was tracking someone," he said after a moment. "A man who'd done something terrible. The trail led here, but then I lost it." "Who was he? What did he do?" Her curiosity was piqued by this glimpse into Jack's past. He shook his head. "It's a long story and not a pleasant one. Maybe another time." His expression lightened. "For now, let's focus on getting you comfortable in the saddle. Same time tomorrow." Dorothy knew she should refuse. Each meeting increased the risk of Uncle Sela's discovering her deception. But the taste of freedom, the joy of learning something new, and though she barely admitted it to herself, Jack's company, were too compelling to resist. "Same time tomorrow," she agreed. Over the next week, their daily meetings continued. Jack taught her more about riding, and soon she was confidently guiding Daisy on her own, even managing a gentle trot. They kept to the property along the creek, but each day they ventured a little farther, explored a little more. Jack brought her books, 2 novels her uncle would never have approved of, with heroines who had adventures and fell in love. He told her stories about the wider world, described cities she'd never seen, and listened with genuine interest to her thoughts and dreams. "Have you ever wondered about leaving?" he asked one afternoon as they sat by the creek, the horses grazing nearby. "Just riding away from here to start a new life." Dorothy had been threading wildflowers into a crown, but her hand stilled at his question. "Of course I've thought about it," she admitted. "But where would I go? What would I do? I have no skills, no money of my own, and Uncle Sila's." She trailed off, thinking of how lost he would be without her. "You're skilled in many ways," Jack countered. "You're intelligent, observant. You learn quickly. You'd find your way." She glanced at him, wondering at the intensity in his voice. "Why is this so important to you? Why do you care what happens to me?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the flowing water of the creek. "When I first saw you watching from that window, something about your expression struck me. You looked trapped. I know what that feels like, to be caught in a life that doesn't fit." He picked up a stone and skipped it across a calm pool in the creek. "And then, when I learned you'd never even been to town, never had friends your own age, it just didn't sit right with me. No one should live in a cage, Dorothy, even a well-intentioned one." His words resonated with feelings she'd barely allowed herself to acknowledge. "Sometimes I feel like I'm only half alive," she confessed. "Reading about experiences I'll never have, places I'll never see." Jack's hand found hers, warm and reassuring. "You can have those experiences, see those places. Your life is yours to choose, Dorothy." The conviction in his voice made her want to believe him. But the reality of her situation, her dependence on her uncle, her lack of worldly knowledge loomed large. "Uncle Silas would never let me go," she said softly. Jack's expression hardened slightly. "You're a grown woman. He can't keep you against your will." "But he's the only family I have," she protested. "And he did save me, raise me all these years." "And for that, you owe him gratitude," Jack acknowledged, "but not your entire future." They sat in contemplative silence for a while, until Dorothy realized how low the sun had sunk. "I need to get back," she said, rising quickly. "Uncle Silas will be looking for me." Jack helped her to her feet, his hand lingering on hers. "Tomorrow," he said, "let me take you beyond the property line, just a little ways. There's a hilltop not far from here with a view that will change your life." She hesitated, the boundary her uncle had set seeming both arbitrary and immovable. "I don't know, Jack. Trust me," he said simply. "Just this once. Let yourself be truly free." His words echoed in her mind as she hurried back to the ranch house, arriving just in time to start supper before Uncle Silas returned from the fields. That evening, as they ate, her uncle seemed more preoccupied than usual. "Did something happen in town?" she asked, noticing how he kept glancing toward the window. He grunted noncommittally, then said, "Sheriff mentioned there's been a stranger asking questions about families in the area. Man with a Texas accent." Dorothy's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What kind of questions?" "About families with young women, particularly those living isolated," Silas replied, his gaze sharp on her face. "Sounds like someone hunting for easy targets, if you ask me." Her mind raced. Could he be talking about Jack? But Jack had been hired by the Silvertons. He wasn't just some drifter. "Maybe he's looking for someone specific," she suggested, trying to keep her voice neutral. Silas narrowed his eyes. "Either way, it's another reason for you to stay close to home. No wandering, understand?" "Yes, Uncle Silas." Later, as she washed the dishes, Dorothy wrestled with doubt. Could Jack have ulterior motives? Was he the man asking questions in town? But that made no sense. He already knew about her, had met her. There would be no need for secrecy. Still, Uncle Silas's warning had planted a seed of uncertainty. She realized how little she truly knew about Jackson Irwin. He'd appeared suddenly in her life, taking an unusual interest in a sheltered young woman. What if Uncle Silas was right to be suspicious? The next day, as she made her way to the creek, these doubts weighed heavily on her mind. Jack was already there, a smile lighting his face when he saw her. Daisy stood saddled and ready beside his own mount. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, studying her troubled expression. "What's wrong?" Dorothy hesitated, then decided directness was best. "My uncle mentioned yesterday that someone with a Texas accent has been asking questions in town about isolated young women. He thinks it's someone looking for targets." Understanding dawned in Jack's eyes, followed by something like resignation. "And you're wondering if that someone is me?" "Is it?" she asked simply. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I've been asking questions in town, yes, but not because I'm looking for targets, Dorothy." He gestured to a fallen log nearby. "Sit with me. I need to tell you something I should have told you from the beginning." Warily, she sat, maintaining some distance between them. Jack remained standing, seeming to gather his thoughts before speaking. "I told you I came to this area tracking someone who'd done something terrible," he began. "What I didn't tell you is that this person was responsible for a fire that killed a young couple 22 years ago, leaving their infant daughter an orphan." Dorothy's breath caught, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. "What are you saying?" Jack's blue eyes held hers steadily. "I believe that infant was you, Dorothy, and I believe the man who set that fire was your uncle, Silas Mercer." The world seemed to tilt beneath her. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Uncle Silas saved me from the fire. He's my mother's brother." "Is he?" Jack challenged gently. "Has he ever shown you any proof of that? Letters from your mother? Family photographs? Anything that would connect him to your parents?" Dorothy's mind raced, trying to recall any tangible evidence of her uncle's relation to her parents. There were no photographs in the house, no keepsakes or mementos of her mother or father. Silas rarely spoke of them beyond vague warnings about trust and danger. Why would he? She couldn't even complete the thought. Jack knelt before her, his voice low and urgent. 22 years ago, Daniel and Elizabeth Ziegler were murdered in a fire that was ruled arson. They had a baby daughter named Dorothy. The prime suspect was Silas Mercer, a man who had been obsessed with Elizabeth for years, long before she married Daniel. Witnesses said he became unhinged when she rejected him, but before he could be arrested, he disappeared along with the Ziegler's infant daughter. Dorothy shook her head, the information overwhelming her. "How do you know all this? Why are you involved?" Pain flickered across Jack's features. "Elizabeth Ziegler was my aunt, my father's sister. I was just a boy when it happened, but I grew up hearing the story. When my father died last year, I found his journals. He never gave up looking for you, Dorothy. He believed you were still alive somewhere, raised by the man who murdered your parents. So you came looking for me." Her voice trembled with shock and disbelief. "I came looking for Silas Mercer," Jack corrected. "The trail led me here to a man living isolated with his niece. I took the job at the Silverton Ranch to investigate further." His expression softened. "Meeting you was unexpected. I planned to gather evidence against Mercer before approaching you with the truth. I didn't want to upend your world without being certain." Dorothy felt as though she might shatter from the weight of his revelations. "And are you certain now? Your age matches, your name matches, and there's this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small daguerreotype, handing it to her carefully. The image showed a handsome couple, the woman holding a small baby. Dorothy stared at the woman's face, the same shape as her own, the same eyes, the same mouth. "That's Elizabeth and Daniel," Jack said softly. "Your parents, and that baby is you." A sob caught in Dorothy's throat as she traced the image with trembling fingers. The resemblance was undeniable. "If this is true," she whispered, "then everything I've believed my whole life has been a lie." Jack placed his hand over hers, his touch gentle. "Not everything. You are still Dorothy Ziegler. You are still the brave, curious woman who's been sneaking away to ride horses and learn about the world beyond her boundaries. That hasn't changed." She looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "What do I do now?" "That's for you to decide," he said. "I can help you leave here today. Take you to Santa Rosa, where I can introduce you to the sheriff. We can make Silas Mercer answer for what he's done." The thought of confronting the man who had raised her, the man who might have murdered her parents, made Dorothy's stomach clench with fear. "I need time," she said. "I need to think." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, but Dorothy, be careful. If Silas suspects that you know or that I've told you the truth, he might become dangerous." She stood, still clutching the daguerreotype. "Can I keep this?" "It's yours by right," Jack replied. "It's one of the few things salvaged from your parents' home after the fire." Dorothy carefully tucked the precious image into her dress pocket. "I'll meet you tomorrow," she said. "Same time, and Jack, thank you for telling me the truth, as hard as it is to hear." He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I only wish I could have found you sooner." As she walked back to the ranch house, Dorothy's mind churned with questions and possibilities. Could it really be true? Had her entire life been built on a foundation of lies and murder? The idea was almost too horrific to contemplate, yet the daguerreotype in her pocket felt like a piece of reality breaking through a lifetime of deception. The woman in the image had her eyes, her smile. If that was her mother, then what did that make Uncle Silas? A kidnapper? A murderer? When she entered the house, she found him sitting at the kitchen table cleaning his rifle. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing at her flushed face. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "You're all windblown." Dorothy forced herself to remain calm, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Just walking by the creek. It's a beautiful day." Silas studied her face with suspicious eyes. "You've been spending a lot of time at that creek lately." "It's spring," she replied, moving to the stove to put on water for tea, keeping her back to him so he couldn't see her expression. "Everything's blooming. I like to see the wildflowers." She felt his eyes on her back, sensed his suspicion like a physical weight. "That's Silverton Foreman," he said suddenly. "Have you seen him around?" Dorothy's hand stilled momentarily before she forced them to continue their work. "Why would I have seen him?" "Answer the question, girl." She turned to face him, summoning every ounce of composure she possessed. "No, Uncle Silas. I haven't seen him." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but for the first time she felt no guilt for deceiving him. If Jack was telling the truth, and the evidence in her pocket suggested he was, then this man had stolen her entire life. Silas seemed to accept her answer, returning to his rifle. "Good. Stay away from the property line for a while. I don't trust that man." "Why not?" she asked, unable to help herself. "He asks too many questions in town, about families in the area, about the history of the place." Silas's hands moved methodically, reassembling the cleaned weapon. "Men like that are trouble." Dorothy turned back to the stove, her mind racing. If Jack was right, then Silas's paranoia suddenly made perfect sense, not as protection, but as self-preservation. He wasn't keeping her safe from the world. He was keeping her hidden from anyone who might recognize her or question their relationship. That night, after Silas had gone to bed, Dorothy slipped the daguerreotype from her hiding place and studied it by candlelight. Her father had been handsome, with kind eyes and a strong jaw. Her mother beautiful, with the same auburn hair Dorothy had inherited. They looked happy, full of hope for the future, a future that had been violently stolen from them. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered a silent apology to the parents she couldn't remember. How different would her life have been if they had lived? If Silas Mercer had never developed his twisted obsession with her mother by morning, Dorothy had made her decision. She would leave with Jack, would seek the truth about her past and justice for her parents. The thought terrified her. She had never been beyond this property, never navigated the world on her own, but staying now felt impossible. Each moment under the same roof as the man who might have murdered her parents was unbearable. She went about her morning chores as usual, giving no indication of her plans. Silas seemed distracted, mentioning that he needed to ride to the northern pasture to check on a break in the fence. "I'll be gone most of the day," he told her gruffly. "Stay close to the house." Dorothy nodded obediently, even as she mentally calculated how long she would have to gather her few belongings and meet Jack at the creek. After Silas had ridden away, she quickly packed a small bundle, a change of clothes, the few books that meant something to her, and a locket that she'd always believed had belonged to her mother. It was the only potential family heirloom Silas had ever given her. As she prepared to leave the only home she'd ever known, Dorothy was surprised to feel a strange sense of freedom rather than sorrow. This house had never truly been a home, it had been a prison, its walls hiding not just her, but the terrible truth of her origins. She was nearly to the door when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Peering through the window, her blood ran cold. Silas was returning, much earlier than expected. Dorothy quickly hid her bundle behind the sofa and tried to look occupied with mending when he entered. His face was thunderous, his eyes wild with a fury she'd never seen before. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "What do you mean?" She fought to keep her voice steady. In response, Silas threw something onto the table between them. It was the daguerreotype of her parents. "Found this in your room," he snarled. "Been going through your things while I was supposedly checking the north fence. Imagine my surprise when I found this." His hand moved to the rifle slung over his shoulder. "He gave this to you, didn't he? That Irwin fellow?" Dorothy stood slowly, keeping the table between them. "It's true, then. You're not my uncle." Silas's laugh was hollow and bitter. "Oh, I could have been your father if your mother hadn't been so foolish. Elizabeth was meant to be mine, not Daniel's. I loved her first, loved her better." "So you killed them?" Dorothy's voice shook with horror and rage. "They left me no choice," Silas shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "She was going to take you and leave the area, disappear where I'd never find either of you again. I couldn't let that happen." "So you murdered them and stole me." The magnitude of his crime, of what he'd taken from her, was almost incomprehensible. "I saved you," he insisted, a wild light in his eyes. "Raised you as my own, given you everything." "You've given me nothing but lies," Dorothy shot back, a lifetime of suppressed anger finally finding voice. "You kept me prisoner here, isolated from everyone, from any chance at a real life." "I kept you safe," he roared. "You kept yourself safe," she countered. "You were hiding from justice, using me as your cover story. What kind of man murders a child's parents and then raises her as his own? What kind of monster does that?" Silas's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" He raised his hand as if to strike her, and Dorothy flinched back. "I'm leaving," she declared, finding a courage she hadn't known she possessed. "I'm going with Jack. He's taking me to the sheriff." Something shifted in Silas's expression then, calculation replacing rage. "Jack, is it? On a first-name basis already?" He lowered his hand, his voice turning deceptively calm. "And where are you meeting this savior of yours?" Dorothy realized her mistake too late. "That's none of your concern." "The creek, I'd wager," Silas continued as if she hadn't spoken. "That's where you've been sneaking off to all this time, isn't it? meeting him behind my back, letting him fill your head with lies." "They weren't lies," Dorothy said firmly. "You're the liar, Silas. You always have been." He flinched at her use of his name rather than uncle, but quickly recovered. "Well then, let's not keep your knight in shining armor waiting." His hand moved to his rifle. "Let's go meet him together." Fear clutched at Dorothy's heart. "What are you going to do?" "Just have a conversation," Silas replied with a chilling smile. "Man to man." Dorothy knew with terrifying certainty that he intended to kill Jack, just as he had killed her parents all those years ago. "I won't let you hurt him," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Silas's smile widened. "You don't have a choice, girl. Now move, or I start our little conversation right here with a bullet through your fancy man's head the moment he appears at our meeting spot." With no other option, Dorothy allowed herself to be marched from the house toward the creek. Her mind raced, desperately trying to formulate a plan. She needed to warn Jack somehow, to keep him from riding into Silas's trap. They reached the creek well before the appointed meeting time. Silas positioned himself behind a large boulder, his rifle trained on the open area where Dorothy usually met Jack. "Call out to him when he arrives," Silas instructed. "Act normal. Get him to dismount and approach you." "And if I don't?" Dorothy challenged. Silas's eyes were cold. "Then I shoot him in the saddle. Your choice if he has a chance to defend himself or not." Dorothy's hands clenched into fists at her sides. If only she had taken Jack's offer to leave the previous day, they could be miles away by now. Instead, she had wanted time to think, to process, and that delay might now cost Jack his life. The minutes crawled by, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Dorothy stood rigidly where Silas had positioned her, visible from the direction Jack would approach but offering no warning of the ambush awaiting him. When she finally heard hoofbeats approaching, her heart sank. She had failed to find a way to warn him. Failed to escape the man who had destroyed her family and stolen her life. Failed Jack, who had only tried to help her reclaim her truth. But as the rider came into view, Dorothy realized with a jolt that it wasn't Jack at all. It was a young woman with blonde hair, dressed in riding clothes, mounted on a bay mare she didn't recognize. Silas cursed under his breath. "Who the hell is that?" The woman pulled her horse to a stop, looking around uncertainly before her eyes landed on Dorothy. "Hello there," she called. "I'm sorry to intrude. Are you Dorothy?" Before Dorothy could respond, Silas emerged from his hiding place, rifle still in hand but not directly pointed at the stranger. "Who's asking?" he demanded. The woman straightened in her saddle, clearly startled by Silas's aggressive tone. "My name is Rebecca Silverton. My father owns the neighboring ranch. I'm looking for our foreman, Jack Irwin. He asked me to deliver a message if he wasn't at the creek by noon." Dorothy's mind worked quickly. Jack must have suspected something might go wrong and arranged this contingency. The question was, what message had he sent? "What message?" Silas asked, echoing Dorothy's thoughts. Rebecca hesitated, her gaze shifting between Silas's rifle and Dorothy's tense posture. "Are you Mr. Mercer?" "I am," Silas confirmed impatiently. "What message?" Instead of answering, Rebecca turned to Dorothy. "Jack said to tell you that the sheriff is waiting at Harper's Crossing. He said you'd know what that meant." Dorothy did know. Harper's Crossing was a small bridge over the creek, about half a mile downstream in the opposite direction from where they were currently standing. Jack must have anticipated Silas's trap and changed the meeting location. Silas's face darkened with rage. The sheriff. He turned his rifle toward Rebecca. "Get down from that horse, girl, slowly." Rebecca's eyes widened with fear, but she complied, sliding carefully from the saddle. "Mr. Mercer, I don't understand." "Shut up," Silas snapped. "Both of you start walking that way." He gestured downstream with the rifle barrel. "Silas, don't do this," Dorothy pleaded as they began walking, Rebecca's horse following behind them. "It's over. The sheriff knows. Jack knows. You can't kill everyone. Watch me," he snarled. "I've built this life for us, Dorothy. I won't let anyone take it away." "It was never my life," she replied sadly. "It was your prison." They walked in tense silence, Silas keeping the rifle trained on them as they approached Harper's Crossing. The small wooden bridge came into view, and with it, two mounted figures waiting on the far side, Jack and an older man wearing a sheriff's badge. Silas swore, grabbing Dorothy roughly and pulling her against him, the rifle now pressed to her temple. "That's far enough," he shouted as Jack and the sheriff started forward. The two men halted their horses. "Silas Mercer," the sheriff called, his voice carrying across the distance. "Let the women go. There's nowhere to run." "I'll kill her," Silas threatened, his arm tightening around Dorothy's throat. "I swear I will." "No, you won't," Jack replied, his voice calm and certain. "You didn't take her from that fire just to kill her now. You've spent 22 years convincing yourself you love her." Silas's grip faltered slightly, and Dorothy felt his uncertainty. "Stay back," he warned. "It's over, Mercer," the sheriff called. "We found the evidence. The witness statements from 22 years ago. The records of your obsession with Elizabeth Ziegler. There's a poster with your face on it in my office, dated the week after the fire. You've been a wanted man for over 2 decades. Dorothy felt Silas's breathing accelerate, the arm around her throat trembling slightly. "You don't understand," he said, his voice suddenly plaintive. "I loved Elizabeth. She was supposed to be mine." "But she wasn't," Dorothy said softly, "and I'm not either. Let me go, Silas. End this." For a terrible moment, she thought he might pull the trigger anyway, might choose to kill her rather than face justice for his crimes. But then, with a sound like a wounded animal, Silas shoved her away and turned the rifle on himself. "No," Dorothy cried, lunging toward him, but it was too late. The shot echoed across the creek, and Silas Mercer crumpled to the ground, blood blossoming across his chest where the bullet had entered. Dorothy stood frozen in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Then Jack was there, having galloped across the bridge the moment Silas turned the weapon on himself. He dismounted in a fluid motion and gathered Dorothy into his arms, turning her away from the gruesome sight. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "It's over now. You're safe." Dorothy clung to him, trembling with shock and relief and grief for a life that had never been hers to live. The sheriff and Rebecca approached, the former kneeling beside Silas's body while Rebecca placed a gentle hand on Dorothy's shoulder. "Are you hurt?" the young woman asked with genuine concern. Dorothy shook her head, her face still buried against Jack's chest. "No, just—" Words failed her. "It's a lot to take in," Jack said, his arms secure around her. "But you're not alone anymore, Dorothy. You'll never be alone again." In the days that followed, Dorothy's world expanded in ways both terrifying and exhilarating. She gave her statement to the sheriff, officially identifying herself as Dorothy Ziegler, the infant believed to have died in the fire that claimed her parents. The story made its way into newspapers as far away as San Francisco, the miraculous return of a child thought lost, raised by the very man who had orphaned her. Jack's father's journals proved invaluable, containing records of the investigation into the fire and Silas's disappearance. There were even earlier entries documenting Silas's troubling behavior toward Elizabeth before her marriage threats, stalking, delusional claims that she loved him despite her engagement to Daniel. The Silvertons, upon learning Dorothy's story, insisted she stay at their ranch while she decided what to do next. Rebecca, only a year younger than Dorothy, quickly became the first real friend she'd ever had, patiently helping her navigate the social customs and daily routines that were completely foreign to her sheltered experience. "You're doing wonderfully," Rebecca assured her one evening as they sat on the porch of the Silverton home. "No one would guess you've been isolated all these years." Dorothy smiled gratefully. "I still feel like I'm pretending like everyone can see right through me." "That's how everyone feels sometimes," Rebecca replied with a gentle laugh. "We're all just figuring it out as we go along." Jack remained a steady presence, never pushing but always available when Dorothy sought him out. He took her riding across the Silverton property and beyond, showing her the wild beauty of the countryside she'd only glimpsed from behind curtained windows. One golden afternoon, nearly a month after Silas's death, Jack led her to a high meadow overlooking the valley, the town of Santa Rosa visible in the distance, the Pacific Ocean a shimmering line on the horizon. "This is what I wanted to show you that day," he said as they dismounted. "This view." Dorothy stood breathless, taking in the vastness of the world spread out before her. "It's incredible," she whispered. "Like it?" Jack asked, a smile playing at his lips. "I love it." She turned to him, her heart full. "Thank you not just for this, but for everything, for finding me." "For the truth." Jack took her hands in his blue eyes serious. "I came looking for justice for my aunt and uncle," he said, "but I found something I wasn't expecting." "What was that?" Dorothy asked, though something in his expression made her heart beat faster. "You," he said simply. "Brave, resilient, curious you." A blush warmed her cheeks. "I'm still finding out who that is." "I know." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "And I'd like to be there while you do, if you'll let me." Dorothy studied his face, open, honest, the antithesis of the man who had raised her on lies and isolation. "I'd like that," she said softly. His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "There's a whole world out there, Dorothy. Places I've seen and places I haven't. We could explore them together." The offer hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. For a moment, Dorothy felt a flicker of the old fear of the unknown, of trusting, of stepping beyond boundaries. But then Jack leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and questioning, and the fear melted away like morning mist. This was what freedom felt like, she realized. Not the absence of boundaries, but the choice of which ones to respect and which ones to transcend. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "I'd like to see Santa Rosa first," she decided. "Then maybe San Francisco, after that. We'll see where the trail leads." Jack's answering grin was bright enough to rival the setting sun. "I can work with that plan." 6 months later, Dorothy stood on the deck of a ferry crossing San Francisco Bay, Jack's arm around her waist as they watched the sprawling city grow closer. After her initial trepidation, she had embraced the wider world with enthusiasm, gradually becoming comfortable in town, learning to navigate social interactions, discovering her own preferences and opinions without Silas's controlling influence. The story of her past had caused a sensation at first, with curious strangers often approaching her in Santa Rosa. But as weeks passed, the furor died down, and Dorothy was free to forge her new identity without the shadow of sensationalism. She had discovered relatives. She never knew she had cousins on her father's side in Sacramento, an elderly great-aunt in Los Angeles who had wept upon meeting her, saying she had Elizabeth's smile. Connections that Silas had deliberately kept from her, connections that now anchored her to a family history she was slowly reclaiming. "Second thoughts?" Jack asked, noticing her pensive expression as they approached the San Francisco docks. Dorothy shook her head, leaning into his embrace. "No. Just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. 6 months ago, I'd never been farther than the creek on Silas's property. Now I'm about to explore one of the biggest cities in California. With me by your side, Jack reminded her, dropping a kiss on her temple. With you by my side, she agreed, turning in his arms to face him. My knight in dusty cowboy attire. He laughed, the sound still one of Dorothy's favorite things in the world. Does that make you a damsel in distress? I was, she acknowledged. But not anymore. Standing on tiptoe, she kissed him, no longer shy about showing affection in public. Now I'm just a woman learning to live on her own terms. And doing a fine job of it, Jack said proudly. Your parents would be amazed by you, Dorothy. The mention of her parents no longer brought only pain. There was still sorrow for all she had lost, for the life that had been stolen from her, but there was comfort too in knowing the truth, in having their photograph now properly framed and displayed in the small house she and Jack had purchased in Santa Rosa. I think they would be happy, she said. Not just about me finding my way, but about us. Jack's eyes softened. I hope so. My father always spoke highly of your father, said he'd never seen a man more devoted to his wife and child. Like father, like daughter, Dorothy replied. I learned devotion from books, but I learned love from you, Jack. The ferry docked with a gentle bump, and the passengers began to disembark. Jack took Dorothy's hand, threading his fingers through hers as they stepped onto the pier. Ready for your next adventure? He asked. Dorothy looked at the bustling city before them, then back at the man beside her, the man who had given her not just the truth, but the freedom to choose what to do with it. With you. Always, she replied. As they walked toward the heart of San Francisco, Dorothy reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. A life confined had expanded into one of limitless possibility. A guardian who had kept her hidden away had given way to a companion who had shown her the open skies. And somewhere along that journey, she had found not just freedom, but home, not in a place, but in the heart of the man who had helped her claim her rightful place in the world. A world that, at last, she was free to explore, to experience, to embrace. That evening, as they stood on a hill overlooking the bay, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Jack dropped to one knee and asked Dorothy to be his wife. With happy tears shining in her eyes, she said yes, knowing that her story, their story, was just beginning. The future stretched before them like the open horizon, full of promise and possibility, a future they would ride toward together under the vast and boundless sky.